The wind howled a mournful tune through the canyons surrounding Redemption, a sound Alara knew well. It mirrored the loneliness that clung to her like the dust devils that danced across the parched earth. Her small cabin, built by her own two hands, sat just outside the town limits, a silent agreement between her and the townsfolk. Close enough for trade, far enough to keep her curse at bay. Alara wasn't sure when the rumors started, only that they'd been whispered since she was a child. A childhood illness had left her with a pronounced limp, and in a town steeped in superstition, a physical imperfection was easily twisted into something sinister. They said her family had angered some ancient spirit, that her limp was a mark of its displeasure, a blight on anyone who associated with her. Life was a constant balancing act. She needed redemption for supplies, for the meager income she earned selling the herbs she gathered and the simple medicine she concocted. But each trip into town was a gauntlet of scornful glances, hushed whispers, and outright cruelty. Children would point and chant, "Cursed! Cursed!" while their parents did little to stop them, sometimes even joining in the hateful chorus with a smirk. The general store owner, a stout man named Mr. Abernathy, would grudgingly serve her, his eyes narrowed, as if she might contaminate his goods just by touching them. "Hurry along, Alara," he'd say, his voice dripping with disdain. "Don't want you bringing bad luck on my other customers." The saloon was even worse. Drunken cowboys would often make crude jokes about her limp, mimicking her gait and calling her Limping Lucy or other, far more offensive names. More than once, she'd had to flee, tears streaming down her face, the sound of their laughter echoing in her ears. Despite the constant negativity, Alara refused to be broken. She found solace in the wild beauty of the land, in the rustling of the leaves, the soaring of the hawks, and the quiet strength of the cacti that bloomed even in the harshest conditions. She learned to read the land, to find water where others saw only barrenness, to identify medicinal plants, and to navigate the treacherous terrain with a surprising agility, her limp becoming less of a hindrance and more of a part of her. She dreamed of a day when she would be seen for who she was, a resourceful, independent woman with a deep connection to the land, not as the cursed outcast Redemption had made her out to be. But deep down, a part of her feared that day would never come, that she was destined to live out her life on the fringes, forever marked by a limp and a lie. The wind picked up again, swirling dust around her cabin, a constant reminder of the harsh reality of her existence and the laughter that always seemed to follow her. The prejudice against Alara wasn't just passive avoidance. It was active and often vicious. Children, mimicking their parents' fears, were the most blatant. During the annual Founders' Day picnic, held right in the center of Redemption, Alara had cautiously approached, hoping to buy a slice of apple pie from Mrs. Henderson's stand. Before she could even reach the counter, a group of boys, no older than 10, surrounded her, chanting, "Curse! Curse! Stay away, you'll spoil the fun." They threw pebbles at her, one hitting her squarely on the arm. Mrs. Henderson, instead of scolding the boys, simply glared at Alara and shooed her away, muttering about bringing bad luck to the festivities. The adults were more subtle, but their disdain cut just as deep. When Alara needed help fixing a broken fence after a particularly harsh storm, she approached several men in town known for their carpentry skills. Each one found an excuse to refuse, their eyes darting away from hers, their voices laced with discomfort. "Too busy," one said, "got my own chores to do." Another claimed, "Lumber's too expensive these days," even though Alara offered to pay. The unspoken reason hung heavy in the air. No one wanted to risk being associated with the cursed woman. Even seemingly harmless interactions were tainted by the town's prejudice. Old Maggie, the baker, usually a kind woman, would only sell Alara day old bread, claiming the fresh loaves were all spoken for. The blacksmith, a burly man named Jebediah, would overcharge her for repairs, justifying it with a shrug and a mumbled, "Risk premium, you know." The worst of it came during the droughts. When the well ran dry and water became scarce, Alara was often denied her share. Some claimed her curse had caused the drought in the first place, that her presence was draining the land of its resources. She had to trek miles to a hidden spring she knew of, hauling water back to her cabin in heavy buckets, her limp making the journey even more arduous. One evening, after a particularly humiliating encounter at the saloon, where a group of cowboys had tied a tin can to her leg to mock her limp, Elara had collapsed in tears. She questioned everything, wondering if they were right, if she truly was cursed. The thought gnawed at her, threatening to extinguish the small flame of hope she had so carefully guarded. But then she looked out at the vast, star-studded sky, felt the cool night air on her face, and remembered the strength she had found in the land. She knew she couldn't let their hate define her. She would endure, she would survive, and she would prove them wrong, even if it was the last thing she did. The town of Redemption, however, seemed determined to make that task as difficult as possible, their laughter and scorn a constant shadow in her life. A stagecoach rattled into Redemption, kicking up a cloud of dust that momentarily obscured the weathered storefronts. Stepping down from the coach was Sheriff Caleb, a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and a firm jaw. He wore his badge with a quiet dignity, a symbol of his commitment to justice and fairness. He'd arrived with a reputation preceding him, a reputation built on unwavering principles and a steady hand. Caleb had come to Redemption seeking a quieter life after years spent patrolling the lawless territories further west. He'd heard Redemption needed a strong sheriff, someone to keep the peace and maintain order. What he hadn't anticipated was the palpable undercurrent of prejudice that permeated the town, a darkness that seemed to cling to the very air. His first encounter with Elara was brief but impactful. He saw her struggling to carry a heavy sack of flour from the general store, her limp making the task particularly difficult. A group of men stood by, watching with amusement, offering no assistance. Caleb, without hesitation, strode over and offered her his arm. "Allow me, ma'am," he said, his voice respectful and genuine. Elara, startled by the unexpected kindness, hesitated for a moment before accepting his help. As they walked, she could feel the eyes of the townspeople on them, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, acutely aware of the whispers that followed them. "Thank you, Sheriff," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Caleb," he corrected gently. "And you are?" "Elara," she replied, her eyes finally meeting his. He saw in them a deep well of sadness, but also a spark of resilience that intrigued him. He helped her carry the flour to her cart, noticing the crude repairs she'd made to its wheels. Before he could say anything further, Elara quickly thanked him again and hurried away, as if eager to escape his presence and the attention they were drawing. Later that day, Caleb inquired about Elara from Mr. Abernathy at the general store. The storekeeper's response was dismissive. "She's just Elara," he said with a wave of his hand. "Lives out by the creek. Best to stay away from her, Sheriff. She's different." Caleb pressed him further, asking about the rumors he'd overheard, the whispers of a curse. Abernathy reluctantly explained the town's superstition, the belief that Elara's limp was a sign of bad luck, a mark of some ancient family transgression. Caleb listened patiently, his expression unreadable, but inside, a sense of indignation began to grow. He didn't believe in curses or superstitions. He believed in justice and fairness, and it was becoming clear that Elara was receiving neither in Redemption. He knew then that his quiet life was about to become much more complicated. The darkness he sensed in the town had a name, and it was pointed squarely at Elara. Caleb's first official act as sheriff, after learning about Elara's situation, was to address the town council. He spoke plainly, his voice resonating with conviction. "I understand there are certain beliefs about Miss Elara," he began, carefully choosing his words. "But regardless of those beliefs, she is a resident of this town and deserves to be treated with respect and fairness. I will not tolerate any harassment or discrimination against her. Is that understood?" His words were met with stony silence. Mayor Thompson, a portly man with a perpetual frown, cleared his throat. "Sheriff, with all due respect, you're new here. You don't understand the history. Alara's family has always been trouble. It's best to just leave things as they are. I understand that you have your traditions, Caleb replied, his voice firm but controlled. But traditions that are based on prejudice and cruelty are not worth preserving. I swore an oath to uphold the law and protect the innocent, and that includes Miss Alara. His stance didn't sit well with the council. They argued that he was interfering with their way of life, that he didn't understand the dangers Alara supposedly posed. Some even hinted that his support for her might bring bad luck upon the town. Caleb listened patiently, but his resolve remained unshaken. He started small, intervening whenever he witnessed acts of discrimination against Alara. He stopped the children from taunting her, issuing stern warnings to their parents. He ensured that Mr. Abernathy sold her fresh goods at a fair price. He even confronted the cowboys at the saloon, warning them that any further harassment would result in jail time. His actions, however, were met with increasing resistance. The townsfolk became more subtle in their cruelty, making it harder for Caleb to intervene directly. They spread rumors about him, questioning his judgment and even suggesting that he, too, was under Alara's curse. One evening, he found a dead raven hanging from the door of his office, a clear message of disapproval. Another time, his horse was spooked and injured, forcing him to walk miles back to town. He knew these were warnings, attempts to intimidate him and force him to back down. But Caleb was not easily deterred. The more the town resisted, the more determined he became to protect Alara. He saw in her a quiet strength and resilience that he admired, a refusal to be broken by the town's hatred. He knew that he was fighting an uphill battle, but he was willing to risk his reputation, his position, and even his safety to ensure that Alara received the justice she deserved. The town of redemption might be set in its ways, but Caleb was determined to change them, one act of kindness and one act of defiance at a time. His badge, once a symbol of peace, was now a symbol of resistance against the town's ingrained prejudice. The dry summer stretched on, baking the land and fraying tempers. A wildfire, sparked by a careless traveler, erupted in the nearby mountains, threatening to engulf redemption. The wind, a fickle ally, whipped the flames into a frenzy, sending plumes of smoke billowing towards the town. Panic gripped the residents. The town's volunteer fire brigade, ill-equipped and disorganized, struggled to contain the blaze. Mayor Thompson, in a state of near hysteria, barked orders that were contradictory and ineffective. The townsfolk, consumed by fear, scrambled to protect their homes and businesses, but their efforts seemed futile against the relentless advance of the fire. Unbeknownst to them, Alara possessed a deep understanding of the surrounding terrain. She knew of hidden canyons and underground streams that could be used to create a firebreak, a natural barrier to halt the fire's progress. She had observed the wind patterns for years, learning how they shifted and changed with the seasons. Seeing the imminent danger, Alara, despite her limp and the town's animosity, knew she had to act. She raced towards the town, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She found Caleb directing the chaotic evacuation efforts, his face grim with concern. "Sheriff," she shouted, her voice hoarse from running. "I know how to stop the fire. There's a canyon to the west, near Widow's Peak. We can use it as a firebreak, but we need to act fast." Caleb, initially surprised to see her, listened intently as she explained her plan. He recognized the urgency in her voice and the knowledge in her eyes. He knew he had to trust her, even if the rest of the town wouldn't. "Gather as many men as you can," he instructed, his voice regaining its usual authority. "Tell them to bring shovels and axes. We're going to Widow's Peak." The townsfolk, still skeptical and wary of Alara, hesitated. Mayor Thompson, his face red with anger, protested. "Are you crazy, Sheriff? We can't trust her. She'll lead us into a trap. We have no other choice," Caleb retorted, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The fire is coming, and Alara is the only one who knows how to stop it. Are you willing to risk the entire town on your superstitions?" His words, coupled with the palpable threat of the approaching fire, finally convinced them. A group of men, albeit reluctantly, gathered their tools and followed Caleb and Alara towards the canyon. Alara led them through the dense undergrowth, her limp slowing her down but her determination unwavering. She directed them to clear brush and dig trenches, creating a firebreak that would, hopefully, divert the flames away from redemption. The work was arduous and dangerous, the heat from the approaching fire intense. But the townsfolk, driven by a desperate desire to save their homes, labored tirelessly, their initial skepticism slowly giving way to a grudging respect for Alara's knowledge and leadership. The fate of redemption, it seemed, rested on the shoulders of the woman they had once scorned. Hours turned into an eternity as the fire raged closer. The heat was intense, the air thick with smoke, making it difficult to breathe. Alara, despite her exhaustion, continued to direct the men, encouraging them to dig deeper, to clear more brush. Caleb, ever vigilant, patrolled the perimeter, ensuring their safety and keeping their spirits up. Finally, as the sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the landscape, the fire reached the firebreak. The flames licked at the cleared earth, hesitating for a moment before encountering the barren ground. The wind howled, carrying embers and sparks, testing the strength of their defense. Then, slowly but surely, the fire began to falter. Deprived of fuel, the flames weakened, unable to jump the gap. The firebreak held. A collective sigh of relief swept through the exhausted group. They had done it. They had saved redemption. As the immediate danger subsided, a sense of camaraderie began to emerge. Men who had previously scorned Alara now looked at her with newfound respect. They had witnessed her courage, her knowledge, and her unwavering determination. They had seen firsthand how her understanding of the land had saved their town. However, the change of heart was not universal. Mayor Thompson, despite the success of Alara's plan, remained skeptical. He muttered about luck and coincidence, refusing to acknowledge her contribution. Some of the more superstitious townsfolk still clung to their beliefs, whispering that the fire had spared redemption only because Alara's curse had somehow appeased the spirits. The next day, as the town began to rebuild and recover, Caleb noticed that Alara had retreated back to her cabin on the outskirts. He found her tending to her herb garden, her movements slow and deliberate. "Alara," he said gently, approaching her, "the town owes you a debt of gratitude." Alara looked up, her eyes tired but her expression calm. "I didn't do it for them, Sheriff," she replied, her voice soft. "I did it for the land. This is my home, and I couldn't stand by and watch it burn." "They need to understand what you did," Caleb insisted. "They need to see you for who you really are." "Some people will never change," Alara said with a shrug. "It's easier to cling to their prejudices than to admit they were wrong." Caleb knew she was right, but he refused to accept it. He was determined to prove to the town of redemption that Alara was not a curse, but a blessing. He just needed to find a way to break through their stubbornness and their fear. The fire had been extinguished, but the battle for Alara's acceptance was far from over. The embers of prejudice still smoldered in the hearts of many, threatening to reignite at any moment. Days turned into weeks, and while some of the townsfolk offered Alara polite nods, or even a hesitant thank you, the underlying prejudice remained. The whispers still followed her, the averted gazes still stung. The saloon, in particular, remained a hostile environment. The cowboys, emboldened by Mayor Thompson's continued disdain for Alara, resumed their taunts and jeers, their words laced with venom. One evening, Caleb was enjoying a quiet drink at the saloon when a particularly obnoxious cowboy, a burly man named Jed, raised his voice. "To Alara, the cursed which you somehow managed to save our town," he sneered, raising his glass. "I say it was just a trick of the devil." A chorus of drunken laughter erupted, and Caleb felt his anger rising. He tried to ignore it, but Jed continued, his voice growing louder and more offensive. "Maybe we should thank her with a little gift," he said, winking at his companions. Caleb had had enough. He stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor, silencing the room. He walked over to Jed, his eyes blazing with fury. "That's enough, Jed," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You will apologize to Alara." Jed scoffed. "And what if I don't, Sheriff? Are you going to arrest me for having an opinion?" "I'm going to arrest you for disturbing the peace," Caleb replied, his hand hovering near his gun. "And if you continue to harass Miss Alara, I'll find plenty of other reasons to put you behind bars." The tension in the room was palpable. The other cowboys watched with bated breath, unsure of what would happen next. Jed, despite his bravado, hesitated. He knew Caleb was a fair man, but he also knew that he wasn't afraid to use force when necessary. "Fine," Jed grumbled, his eyes filled with resentment. "I apologize to the cursed witch." Caleb's grip tightened on his gun, but he managed to restrain himself. "Get out, Jed," he said, his voice cold. "And don't come back until you can learn to show some respect." Jed, defeated but defiant, stormed out of the saloon, slamming the door behind him. The remaining cowboys, chastened by the encounter, quickly dispersed, leaving Caleb alone with his drink and his thoughts. He knew that this was just a small victory in a much larger battle. The prejudice against Alara ran deep, and it would take more than a few arrests to change the hearts and minds of the townsfolk. But he was determined to keep fighting, to keep defending her, even if it meant alienating himself from the rest of the town. He owed it to her, and he owed it to himself, to stand up for what was right. He just wasn't sure how much longer he could do it while wearing the badge. The weight of his responsibility was becoming heavier with each passing day, and he wondered if there was another way, a more drastic way, to finally break the curse of prejudice that had gripped redemption for so long. The next morning, Caleb walked into the town square, a determined glint in his eyes. The townsfolk, sensing something was amiss, gathered around, their faces etched with curiosity and apprehension. Mayor Thompson, ever the antagonist, pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his expression a mixture of suspicion and defiance. Caleb stood before them, his posture tall and unwavering. He took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the people he had sworn to protect. "I came to Redemption hoping to find a peaceful community," he began, his voice clear and strong. "But what I found was a town divided by fear and prejudice, a town that refuses to see the goodness in one of its own." He paused, his eyes locking with Mayor Thompson's. "I have tried to reason with you, to show you the error of your ways, but you are too blinded by superstition and tradition to see the truth." He reached for his badge, the symbol of his authority, the emblem of his commitment to justice. He unpinned it from his chest, the silence in the square amplifying the metallic click as it detached from his shirt. He held the badge in his open palm, the silver gleaming in the morning sun. "This badge represents the law," he continued, his voice unwavering. "But the law is meaningless if it is not applied fairly to everyone. And in Redemption, the law has not been fair to Alara." He looked towards Alara's cabin, which was visible in the distance. He knew she was watching, and he hoped she understood what he was about to do. "I cannot, in good conscience, continue to serve as your sheriff," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "I cannot be a part of a community that treats one of its own with such cruelty and disrespect." With a deliberate motion, he placed the badge on the ground, the silver clattering against the dusty earth. The sound echoed through the square, a symbolic severing of his ties to the town. "I resign," he announced, his voice filled with both sadness and resolve. "I will no longer be your sheriff." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mayor Thompson's face turned crimson with anger. He sputtered, trying to find the words to express his outrage, but Caleb cut him off. "I'm not leaving Redemption," Caleb said, his eyes fixed on the mayor. "I'm staying here to stand by Alara, to show her that she is not alone. And I will continue to fight for her until she receives the respect and acceptance she deserves." He turned and walked away, leaving the badge lying in the dust, a testament to his unwavering commitment to justice and his unwavering belief in Alara. He knew that his decision would have consequences, but he was prepared to face them. He had chosen his side, and he would not. Caleb walked towards Alara's cabin, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He wasn't sure how she would react to his actions, but he knew he had to be honest with her to lay his feelings bare. He found her sitting on her porch, tending to a small pot of wildflowers. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable. "Caleb," she said softly, her voice filled with a hint of surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I had to see you," he replied, his voice earnest. "I had to tell you how I feel." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Alara, I know this may come as a surprise, but I admire you. I admire your strength, your resilience, your unwavering spirit. Despite everything this town has thrown at you, you have never given up, you have never lost your kindness." He stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers. "I've also come to care for you, Alara, more than I ever thought possible." Alara's eyes widened, her cheeks flushing with color. She had never expected to hear such words from anyone, let alone from a man like Caleb. "I know that redemption may never accept you," Caleb continued, his voice filled with sadness. "And I can't force them to change. But I can offer you a different life, a life free from their negativity, a life filled with love and respect." He knelt before her, taking her hand in his. "Alara, will you marry me? Will you leave redemption with me and build a new life together, a life where you are valued and cherished?" Tears welled up in Alara's eyes, blurring her vision. She had spent so many years dreaming of acceptance, of belonging, but she had never dared to dream of love. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he pleaded, his eyes filled with hope. "Say yes, and let's leave this town behind and start over, together." Alara looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity and the love that shone within them. She knew that he was offering her a chance at happiness, a chance at a future she had never thought possible. But she also knew that leaving redemption would mean abandoning her home, the land she loved, the place where her roots ran deep. It was a difficult decision, one that would shape the rest of her life. She thought of the townspeople, their faces a mix of scorn and indifference. And then she looked back at Caleb, his eyes filled with unwavering affection. "Yes," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "Yes, Caleb, I will marry you. But I don't want to leave redemption. Not yet." Caleb's face fell slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Then we'll stay," he said, his voice resolute. "We'll stay and we'll fight. We'll show them that love and kindness can conquer even the deepest prejudice. And we'll do it together, as husband and wife." He stood up, pulling Alara into his arms. He held her close, feeling her warmth against him, knowing that he had found something truly special, something worth fighting for. Their future was uncertain, but they faced it together, united by their love and their determination too. News of Caleb's resignation and his engagement to Alara spread like wildfire through redemption, dividing the town even further. Some were outraged by his actions, accusing him of betraying them and siding with a cursed woman. Others were secretly impressed by his courage and his unwavering commitment to what he believed was right. The wedding was set to take place in a small clearing near Alara's cabin, a simple ceremony attended only by a few close friends. As Alara stood at the makeshift altar, waiting for Caleb, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She knew that many in redemption still disapproved of her, and she feared that their prejudice would cast a shadow over her special day. Suddenly, a group of people emerged from the trees, walking towards the clearing. Alara recognized them. It was old Maggie, the baker, along with Mr. Abernathy, the general store owner, and a handful of other townsfolk, their faces etched with a mixture of humility and determination. Old Maggie stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "Alara," she said, "we came to apologize. We were wrong about you. We let fear and superstition cloud our judgment, and we treated you unfairly." Mr. Abernathy nodded in agreement. "You saved our town, Alara. You risked your life to protect us, and we repaid you with scorn and ridicule. We are ashamed of our behavior." The other townsfolk echoed their sentiments, their voices filled with remorse. They spoke of Alara's kindness, her resilience, and her unwavering spirit. They acknowledged that her limp was not a curse, but a testament to her strength and her ability to overcome adversity. "We know that we can never fully make up for what we've done," old Maggie continued, "but we want to start by asking for your forgiveness. And we want you and Caleb to know that you are welcome in redemption. This is your home, and we want you to stay." Tears streamed down Alara's face as she listened to their heartfelt words. She had waited so long to hear those words, to feel accepted and valued by the community she had always longed to be a part of. Caleb, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward and took Alara's hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Your words mean more than you know." Mayor Thompson, however, remained conspicuously absent. His prejudice, it seemed, was too deeply ingrained to be swayed. But Alara didn't care. She knew that she couldn't change everyone's minds, but she had finally received the acceptance she had craved for so long. And with Caleb by her side, she knew that she could face whatever the future held. The wedding ceremony proceeded, filled with love and hope. Alara and Caleb exchanged vows, promising to support and cherish each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. As they sealed their commitment with a kiss, a sense of peace settled over the clearing, a feeling that redemption was finally on the path to healing. Caleb, no longer bound by the constraints of his former position, dedicated himself to helping Alara. They worked together to establish a small clinic where Alara could use her knowledge of herbs and medicine to care for the sick and injured. Caleb, with his experience in law enforcement, helped to mediate disputes and resolve conflicts, promoting fairness and understanding within the community. Slowly but surely, redemption began to change. The children, inspired by Caleb and Alara's example, started to treat each other with more kindness and respect. The adults, witnessing the positive impact of their efforts, began to question their own prejudices and biases. Old Maggie and Mr. Abernathy became staunch allies, actively promoting Alara and Caleb's work and encouraging others to embrace tolerance and compassion. They organized community events, bringing people together and fostering a sense of unity. Even Mayor Thompson, though he never fully apologized, began to soften his stance towards Alara. He grudgingly acknowledged her contributions to the town and even sought her advice on occasion. Years passed, and redemption transformed from a town divided by fear and superstition into a community united by love and acceptance. Alara and Caleb became pillars of the town, their names synonymous with justice, kindness, and hope. They raised a family, teaching their children the importance of empathy, understanding, and standing up for what is right. They instilled in them a deep respect for the land and for all living things. Alara's limp, once a symbol of shame and ridicule, became a source of pride, a reminder of her strength and her ability to overcome adversity. She inspired countless others to embrace their own imperfections and to find beauty in their differences. And so, the tale of Alara, the cursed woman, who was once scorned and ridiculed, became a legend in redemption, a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief in the goodness of humanity. The town, once defined by its prejudice, was now defined by its compassion, its acceptance, and its unwavering commitment to creating a better future for all. The wind still howled through the canyons, but now it carried a different tune, a melody of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The end.